Hi there. All of the essays that you'll be writing in this class require to use sources. For a lot of students, this is an intimidating and negative part of the course that they would rather dispense with. They would rather give their own opinion, their own personal examples. It's certainly a lot easier to do that. And there are some difficulties in using sources. But using sources, using books, magazines, YouTube videos, to support your arguments and your essays really can strengthen your writing in a great deal. And it can be made a little simpler with just some clear instruction, I think, and some practice. It'll take a little bit of practice. In my experience, though, by the end of the semester, if you keep working at it, you're going to be great at it. You'll be very strong at using this, and it will really help your writing in all your classes. So let's look at how to cite sources, or how to use sources. Now, I divide this up into several different lessons. This lesson is going to be talking about how to use them effectively, or in other words, when to use a source, why to use a source, how to incorporate it into your own writing. Later, we'll be looking at how to cite the sources, how to say where they came from, how to give credit for them, those kinds of things. So, how to use sources effectively. And this is, I think, is a real important first step. I used to not teach this. I used to just say, well, let me show them how to cite sources. And I had a lot of problems, but I learned, no, there's a lot of art that goes into using them effectively. And once you learn these techniques, then the quality of your writing and your use of sources is going to improve dramatically. So, first of all, you have to understand the concept of why use a source at all. Why do we do it? And the number one reason, and the one I'm going to come back to again and again in this class, is evidence for your claims. The main number one all-important reason for using a source is to provide specific facts, examples, expert testimony. These constitute evidence or proof for what it is you're writing about. And that is the number one most important reason. There are some other reasons that you may find useful. Summarizing an important theory or argument may be important. You may have to summarize some Jungian psychology in order to explain how it's relevant to your argument, something like that. Explaining a key term or important background information is also useful, especially in your introduction or when you're first introducing a concept. You may need to explain that term, and you might need a source, some sort of expert to explain that for you. You also use sources when you are addressing your opponent's counterargument. So you're going to criticize a theory, some counterargument. You're going to defend yourself against some attack from your opponent. It's often helpful to cite those opponents. It shows that you've done your reading and you've done your research and that you're fair-minded and you're actually citing real arguments, not straw men arguments. So often that's another use of a source. Sometimes to conclude or to open your essay with a pithy quote can be useful. And of course, the most important reason, impressing your teacher. But really, the most important reason is evidence. That's really what I really want you to focus on. Bad reasons to use sources: citing people's opinions and generalizations. Normally, this is not going to be good. Now, surveys can be good. So like an opinion survey, opinion poll can be useful to show what people think. But as far as evidence, you wouldn't say, I believe that we should have gun control, and as proof of this, many people believe this as well, right? That doesn't really prove my point that well, honestly. Citing common knowledge is definitely not something you want to do. Citing topic sentences and thesis statements, not very good. Oh, I should mention generalizations. General statements are not very good. What you want from your sources are specific facts. The only time a generalization might be useful is when you have an expert on the field who is summarizing a whole body of research that's too complicated to go into in your essay. That can be useful. So let's look at some examples. So I'd like you to read through these sentences and decide, are these good uses of sources or not? And would it fit those, what we were just talking about? Pause the video and take a look at these. So number one, we cannot always avoid stress in our lives. No, that's kind of common knowledge. It's a generalization. There's no reason to cite that. You don't need somebody, you don't need an expert to tell you that. According to Freud, there are several ways that the ego protects itself from stressful threats, and these are called defense mechanisms. Absolutely, that's a really good use. It's a brief summary or explanation of a key term or a theory. Number three, in the past 5 years, almost half of all those surveyed said that their stress had increased, and only a quarter said it had decreased. This is a good use of source. This is a specific survey or fact that we can use to indicate that people are more stressed out. Number four, there are many ways that people can become stressed out. No, that's common knowledge, I guess. It's a generalization, certainly. No need for that. Stress is an uncomfortable feeling. No kidding, yes. No reason to cite that. You don't need anybody, you don't need to cite an expert to tell you that stress is uncomfortable. Number six, according to Benjamin Leahy, there are three general ways that people can cope with stress. If Benjamin Leahy is an expert, and presumably he is somewhere, if you've explained that, then that would be useful. This is kind of introducing kind of a theoretical background by an expert. Okay. So now let's talk about ways to use sources, how to incorporate them into your writing. There are a number of ways. Direct quotes are the most common. Then you have blended quotes. This is half a direct quote, half not. Paraphrasing, summary, and just picking pieces of data. So let's take a look at each of these. A direct quote. So here's my quote. According to Benjamin B. Leahy, 3 effective coping strategies involve changing how we think about the stressful event, focusing attention away from stressful events that cannot be changed, and religious coping. All right. Now notice a couple things about this. I've got what's called a signal phrase. I'll be talking about this in more detail, but this, according to Benjamin B. Leahy, that's my signal phrase. I can improve it if I add the credentials. According to Benjamin B. Leahy, comma, professor of psychology at the University of Harvard University, and then, so that's even better if I give the credentials for this person. If Benjamin B. Leahy is not important, well, I probably may not want to cite him. If he's not got any credentials, then maybe I don't want to use him. But if he does have credentials, put those in there. Notice the punctuation. I put the comma first, then the quote marks, and at the end, I put the period first, and then the quote marks. If I'm using parentheses, then the period's going to go at the end after the parentheses. Make sure you're accurate. I've seen students misquote the quotation, and it says opposite of what it was supposed to, or something different. And then most important, avoid overusing this. As a rule of thumb, 2 or 3 direct quotes are going to be allowed in each essay. Okay, now that's kind of an arbitrary number, but I'm trying to get students to stop overusing this. Most people have a tendency to overuse these when they're beginning using these. They just put a full direct quote in there. Problem is, they tend to be a little wordy, and they shift a lot of the attention away from what you're writing. A lot of times people get dominated by their quotes in their materials, and you need to dominate it. You need to control it and use it for your purposes, rather than having these big clunky chunks of text in there that are not yours. So, like I said, 2 or 3 times direct quotes, that's okay, but you shouldn't be using that too much. Instead, try using a blended quote. A blended quote is a very elegant way to use this. So here's my original quote. Our cognitions are intimately linked to our reactions to stressful events, and a number of effective methods of coping involve cognitive strategies. All right, so that's my original quote. Blended quote is partly your language, partly the author's, because the way we think is, quote, intimately linked to our reactions to stressful events, unquote. Leahy points out that we can deal with stress by changing how we view the situation. This is very elegant. I love these blended quotes. It's got a little bit of quoted material, but it's mainly yours. You'll notice the other thing I like about this is you take ownership of the material. It's becoming more you. It's your language. It's your style. It doesn't have this kind of clunky academic style. It has your style, which I like that. That's a really, really good technique. Another technique is just to entirely paraphrase, not to use any words from the original. 3 effective coping strategies involve changing how we think about the stressful event, focusing attention away from stressful events that cannot be changed, and religious coping. Here's a bad paraphrase, first of all. With a bad paraphrase, all the writer does is substitute some vocabulary. 3 successful coping techniques involve changing how we contemplate the stressful event, directing attention away from nerve-wracking events that cannot be changed, and religious managing. Here the writer has just substituted vocabulary, synonyms throughout. That's a bad paraphrase. Make the paraphrase your own. Okay, what I recommend, in fact, sometimes is maybe just get rid of the article, don't look at it, and just write it from your own ideas, from your own heart. What do you think? According to Leahy, we can deal with stress by changing our perspectives, refocusing our minds, or appealing to spiritual beliefs. This is totally the writer's own. This is a nice summary. It's accurate, but it's you. It's you, the writer, not just a repeat of my source. So paraphrasing can be really effective. Another is to summarize a large section. According to Freud, there are several ways that the ego protects itself from stressful threats, which are called defense mechanisms and include displacement, sublimation, projection, reaction formation, regression, rationalization, repression, denial, and intellectualization. This is probably a summary of a long article or a book. I mean, it encapsulates all of Freud's theories, or a lot of his theories, into a very compressed sentence. It's a good way to cover a wide range of text, but make sure it's accurate. Again, summaries, whatever you're writing, make sure it's accurate. Or just pick data. Approximately 330 million people live in the United States. Now, I didn't know that off the top of my head. I had to go to Wikipedia to get that. I'm going to cite that, and I'm going to use that, but I don't need to put quote marks. It's my own language, and you just use the number or the percentage. If I'm citing exactly, 3 or 4 words in a row, that's not plagiarism. I don't have to put quote marks around that. All right. So next, important rules for using sources. We talked about how to use them stylistically. Now I want to look at some really key elements. And these include choosing relevant information. Don't drop a bomb. I'll show you what that is. Use the source sandwich technique. Use a signal phrase to lead into the information. I mentioned that earlier. Don't put the title and publication information. Occasionally you can, but by and large you don't want to. And use good verbs. Even your verbs make a difference. So let's look at each of these points. First of all, choose relevant information. One of my favorite techniques of dealing with stress is to immerse myself in sports. That's mine, that's my topic sentence. This can help because it helps refocus my mind off the stressful situation, which, according to Leahy, can be associated with less depression and better physical health. This is relevant to what I'm talking about. Bad use. There are many ineffective ways of coping with stress. According to Freud, the ego possesses a small arsenal of defense mechanisms. See, there's no connection between these two sentences. They're not really directly related. Now, maybe there's a relation, but you need to show the relationship. You show the connection. So either choose what's relevant or show the relevance of the information. Don't drop a bomb. By dropping a bomb means you're going along, writing your writing, and then just drop a quote in, and then just go back on your merry way. This is really awful, but I see this with beginning writers too often. There are many negative ways of coping with stress. It appears that many individuals cope with ineffective stress by using tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs to soothe their emotional reactions to stress. One thing that I try to avoid is excessive eating. Whoa, that's a bomb. They just dropped it in there, and What's the connection? What's the relationship? Where's it coming from? Provide some transitions, some context. You gotta smooth the way in there. Here's an easy technique you can use: a source sandwich. So when I say a source sandwich, it begins with you. That's my top layer. Then my source. That's my middle layer. And then back to me, or back to you on the bottom layer. So in other words, it goes from you to source to you, where you begin with your generalization, some point you're making, the source that's your evidence to back it up or explain it, and then some sort of commentary or follow-up or transition into your next point. A source sandwich. Here's an example. A common technique for dealing with stress is sublimation. There's your topic sentence. Now my source. According to Freud, sublimation involves reducing the stress of prohibited impulses by converting the impulses into socially approved activities. Here now is my source. It's pretty abstract though, so it's good to follow it up with my own example. For instance, when I get angry with my boss, I exercise vigorously, channeling my angry energy into something productive and healthy. That's a good example. So this is a perfect source sandwich. From me to Freud to me. Use a signal phrase to lead into the information. We saw this before, but basically the signal phrase is the author's name. Usually only the last name, could be first and last, but never use the first name, okay? As Benjamin says, no, you gotta use the last name. Use the author's credentials if possible, at least the first time you're using that person. That source. A skillful technique is a grammatical structure called an appositive. So an appositive is a noun that comes after another noun that explains that previous person. Marta Gonzalez, a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan, has observed that. So this section here, a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Michigan. This is an appositive. It's explaining who Marta Gonzalez is. And then it goes on. This is especially important when the author is an expert to use those credentials or to use the signal phrase there. Don't put the title of the article. Don't put the website or the publication or the publisher. Just put the author's last name. That's normally, there are a few cases you might do this, but by and large, just put that author's last name. You can also use a transition, a word like for instance, or indeed, in fact, could go on and on. A lot of different transition phrases you could use to smooth the way into your source. Another thing is the verbs. The verbs are how you report this. So there are some weak verbs. Says or writes. What's wrong with this? Okay, Benjamin Leahy says. Okay, well, part of it is says doesn't tell you whether you agree with it or disagree. It just says somebody said something. Strong verbs will show your attitude toward the author. For instance, to cite people who agree with you. These are people you like, okay? You're going to say observe, okay? Dr. Mary Smith observes or points out or notes or demonstrates or proves or reports. These are all indicating that what the writer is saying is true. And so it not only says that they wrote it or said it, but that it's factual. Now, on the other hand, if it's somebody who disagrees with you, somebody you don't like, claims, implies, insinuates, all of these verbs tell me that they said it, but that you're doubtful about it, okay? So using strong verbs can be really, really helpful. Sources are valuable. They carry a lot of weight in your essay. They provide a lot of heft and a lot of academic power to your writing. So use them to provide evidence for your opinions and claims. Don't use other opinions, but use facts as much as possible. Try to vary your use between direct quotes, paraphrase, summary, blended quote, all these things. Choose relevant information. Don't drop a bomb in there. Give me some transition. Try the source sandwich. Your idea, source, your idea. Use a signal phrase to lead into it, or use a transition. Don't put too much information in that signal phrase, just the author and the author's credentials, by and large. Use good verbs. And then finally, you need to cite correctly. In subsequent lessons, we'll be talking about citing. And so I look forward to seeing you do all this in your essay, and I look forward to seeing some really powerhouse essays with nice use of sources. All right, take care.